What we're going to go through today, there's going to be two sections to this. The first part is going to be focused on the Atacama cover-up, I'm calling it now. It used to be the Atacama mystery. And the second part is going to be about the cosmology, close encounters of the fifth kind, and an understanding of how the cosmos actually operates. The first half, dealing with the Atacama skeleton, is an interesting phenomenon because it turns out there's not just one of these, but there are at least two. And I just got a report from Chile last night that multiple of these small creatures have been seen live and living in these foothills of the Andes in the Atacama region. The Atacama skeleton was found in this area of Chile. It is about 6 inches. I found it saw it, in 2009. I didn't discover it, nor did I take it out of Chile, regardless of what the New York Times has been alleging. In reality, a treasure hunter found it in an old ruins of an Indian village in the foothills of the Atacama region in this area of Chile. Now, this is an area that the native peoples had reported seeing small people, which they call the Gentiles. It's an interesting term they use for them, for centuries and perhaps millennia. And it had also been associated with seeing UFOs. It was actually taken in the area right over where this Atacama skeleton was found. And there are very unusual objects that are seen going in and out of the Andes that are luminous, partially materialized objects, sometimes fully materialized. And the report I received last night from a researcher who I have credit this photograph and a lot of this information to, Alex Chianetti, thank you, is that there are reports of these being seen recently by people in that area as living organisms. And the one that I want to show you next, this is the one that is in the possession of a man in Barcelona. And he was a man who went to Chile, met the treasure hunter who had been sifting through these old ruins from the late 1800s, early 1900s in mining towns, looking for treasures, basically, old artifacts. And in a pouch, in one of them, someone had preserved and saved this. Now, I first learned of this in 2009. It was found in 2003. And the public knew some of the information on it beginning in 2004 and 5. Some studies were done in Europe showing that it was in fact not human. The anthropologists had found that there was wear on some of the connective tissue still remaining on the feet, that it had walked around, et cetera, and so on. However, no thorough genetic testing had been done because to do the genetic testing requires damaging this very unusual skeleton. I was invited first just to view it. And when I first saw it, I put it in my hand, and I have big hands. Size 9 surgical gloves. Anyway, and it was 6 inches. It did not take up my whole hand. And I looked at this, and I knew immediately that this was not a model or a fake or what have you. I knew that this was an actual, had been a living organism. And so we examined it, looked at it, photographed it, made a connection with Ramon in Barcelona, who owned it, and we kept the dialogue going. In 2012, I was able to convince him to allow us to come over with a technical and sort of surgical team and take samples of the bone and be able to get bone marrow that could then be extracted and run through some genetic tests to see if it matches or didn't match to any known species on Earth. Now, during that time, we got a bunch of x-rays and CAT scans, and you'll see that it has a very different appearance to a fetus or a newborn baby. And if you look carefully at this, you'll also see that on a newborn and a fetus, the bones are very, very thin. They're rubbery. This is the knee on the Atacama humanoid. We'll get into this. And what you'll also find is that the skull has 4 bones, and we have 6. The Atacama has 10, we have 12, etc. It's grossly, obviously different from a human. Now, the question was, then what is it? For the record, I have never stated it is of extraterrestrial origin. We do not know what this is. But the hatchet job done at Stanford and UCSF and Genome Research magazine, which is atrocious on this study, is going to get exposed very quickly. And this is me holding up the skeleton. And when you see it, look at the extent of the calcification and how opaque it is. The amount of calcium in those bones is consistent with a small child. Because when you're in utero, there is not much calcium in those bones. They're very cartilaginous, meaning like cartilage. This is why newborn babies, I'm a trauma doctor, when there's a terrible accident, they're amazing. They're like Gumby bears. They can move and do this, and they don't have a broken bone. Why? Because they don't have a high degree of calcification, which you have as you get older. And there are a lot of technical reasons for this, having to do with osteoblasts and things that will put the general audience to sleep. I will not go into. But it's important to note that. And the very first thing, the radiologist in Barcelona, when we pulled this off the x-ray machine and out of the CAT scanner, they all went, oh, my God, this is not a fetus. They had assumed this little thing had to be an ejected or aborted fetus, 22 weeks, 28 weeks. They said, this was a child, and it was up running around. It had epiphyseal plates. What are epiphyseal plates? Epiphyseal plates are in where the long bones, and you will see that there's a place, what's called a growth plate. And you know when you're growing, the bones have to grow because there's a growth plate in the long bones that allows them to continue to grow and lay down new bone and get longer and longer as we get taller and taller as we reach our full mature height. Those epiphyseal plates are consistent with a 6 to 8 year old human child in terms of developmental stage. There is another one. Look at the skull and look at the overlapping helmet-like feature. If you look at the skull sutures and the way a large skull bone comes over to like a point and overlaps, it's identical to the Atacama skeleton. This is from Russia from 1996. A separate small being that was found running around that a woman captured, unfortunately kept it in captivity, tried to feed it yogurt. It died and was subsequently autopsied. I understand that it was later confiscated by some authorities after initial tests had been done. It's bigger. This is an adult. The skull is the same essentially as the Atacama. Now, what's important about that is that if there are 2 of these, it rules out a singular genetic mutation of a human embryo. There's no way. It isn't going to happen. Be 1 in a quadrillion chances. Interestingly, it was the assistant of Dr. Gary Nolan at Stanford who had offered to do an honest examination of this genetically, who found this Russian being, and then I had another researcher send it to me. And I recalled that in 1996, when I was over in England, I was told about this, but by the time I wanted to go over to Russia to get it, it had been seized and it had vanished. We do not know where it is now. I've heard different stories of where it is. One account is that it was buried on the shore of the Black Sea, another is that it's in the KGB's or FSB's hands. We do not know. It's not available for examination, which means all we have are these images. Now, this means that with 2 of them, we really have a phenomenon of something that is a creature, that is a humanoid or human-like creature, not described in the medical literature, not described in the scientific literature anywhere. And so this became even more of a mystery. I will let you just peruse this. This is from Dr. Ralph Lockman. Now, he is sort of the world's expert on skeletal abnormalities in children, and actually literally wrote the textbook. And he reviewed all the x-rays and all the CAT scans, and he came to the conclusion it was a 6 to 8 year old child, that the chances that it was progeria, which is a type of genetic condition where you age your bones rapidly and could be, younger than that, is extremely small. And he had never seen anything like this. And this from the man at both UCLA and Stanford, who is the professor who is the world's expert on skeletal dysplasias, abnormalities in the skeleton in children. And it matched no genetic syndrome. So by this point, and this was in the fall of 2012, we knew we had something significant. I went and got the bone marrow in September, late September 2012. The DNA was handed off, along with these images, to Stanford and to Dr. Nolan in October of 2012. And then it seems everything fell apart. Now, you can read these for yourself, where he's basically saying that the chances this is a spontaneous chance mutation are infinitesimally small. And we had discussions where he said, essentially, we don't know what this is, but the chances it could be a mutation from just a singular event in a human embryo are infinitesimal. And we began to look forward to these genetic workups. And this is an extensive area of esoteric science. We're not going to go into the arcane nature of it. This was worrisome. 1 month later, a $3.2 million grant award, the Teal Award, was granted to Nolan and his lab from the Department of Defense. I have an assistant supporter who found this. I did not know that until a few weeks ago. I thought, well, it's not proof of anything. It's worrisome because by the time he began to start running the genetic tests and workups, it seems that he had been told by someone to say it was a deformed human. And that's what you will read in the New York Times and on CNN and the BBC that came out in March. What was most worrisome, and I haven't talked about this until now, when Sirius premiered 5 years ago, April 24th, it made quite a stir for almost an entire week. If this was the #1 story on the Huffington Post. The major news media, The View, were all contacting me to have interviews. Dr. Nolan went out to the public and stated, don't worry, it's a deformed human. The day of the premiere and the release of the movie Sirius, which many of you helped fund. Of course, I was shocked by this betrayal, since the work had not been done properly yet. All the evidence has suggested it was not, but it submarined the film. It submarined and torpedoed the entire launch of Sirius, which was part of our disclosure effort. And none of the mainstream media would cover this after that, because case closed, it's a deformed human. A year later, he's at the Society for Scientific Explanation. And we'll just take a listen.
I reached out to Stephen. He actually, within about 10 or 15 minutes, I got an email reply back. And then we basically went through a little bit of a negotiation as to what terms would be under which I would analyze this. And one of the things that I promised him, that I would not come at this with a hyper-skeptical way of analyzing or looking at it and not throw out the baby with the bathwater the moment I found something that made it look like it was only human or was not anomalous in any way. And to this day, I'm not going to. So I'm not going to make a pronouncement of what this thing is. I'm going to give you enough data to make your own decisions.
Now, this is a year later. Meanwhile, at some point during this period, he hooks up with this group. Now, this is a man who stayed at my home. He was one of the lead men in the group, Blink 182. I sort of mentored him when he was a young man, teenager and older. He flew me and 3 of my 4 daughters to a concert in Pittsburgh with him, and we hung out. Went to a Joshua Tree with him, with his band. And, you know, there are a lot of people in the music and film world who follow what we're doing, obviously. And what was worrisome is that somewhere between the early 2000s and now, he got contacted by a number of people in the intelligence community, such as General McCaskill, if you look at the WikiLeaks Podesta hack during the Trump-Clinton campaign, where he was getting information from this Wright-Patterson Air Force Base general about the subject, all of it tailor-made to make him make the assessment, have the assessment that there's an alien threat that we need to worry about. And what happened is that, like so many people who look into this subject, they get sucked into what I call the black hole of disinformation that has been pre-positioned out there, that if you look into the UFO subject and then the extraterrestrial subject, you will be pulled into what is 90+% pre-positioned, intelligence community created disinformation designed to have people hate anything not human. And unfortunately, he got brainwashed in that direction. Subsequently, he founded a group, which we'll go through just quickly, some of these gentlemen. And what you find is CIA, Jim Semivan, you Puthoff. Now, I've known about Dr. Puthoff for decades. He does zero-point energy research. He's worked for every 3-letter agency. His closest friend told me personally that he knew we already had these technologies, but that if he were to bring them forward, he would be killed along with his family and children. But he is an operative for the intelligence community and also a physicist. Another one, Aerospace Division, Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works. This gentleman, who you've seen on the news with the December New York Times CNN release of gun camera footage, is a man described to me by my sources in the Pentagon and CIA as a master of counterintelligence. And as you all know now, he headed up this threat assessment division at the Pentagon dealing with UFOs. Now, this gentleman is, in the circles that I'm connected to, very much someone who they pick to go forward to provide counterintelligence and false information or partial information to the public. Chris Mellon, distant relative of Paul Mellon, who helped found the CIA with Allen Dulles. I'm good friends with one of his distant cousins, who was the son of Senator John Warner, a member of the Magic Committee, along with Bush Sr. and Dick Cheney and others. This gentleman recently wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post stating that the Pentagon ought to look into this subject, but he didn't understand why they weren't. Well, meanwhile, I know people who work in the Pentagon, in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and in every agency, in the sub-basement and other off-site locations that are reverse engineering extraterrestrial spacecraft that we have downed using electromagnetic weapons. And yet this man, who had been a senior official of the Pentagon, as well as on the staff of Senator John Warner, is writing op-ed pieces saying, well, we don't really know what this is. We'll call them UAPs, unexplained aerial phenomenon. Well, this is the new term instead of UFO, both of which are fake terms because they're not unidentified at all and they're not unexplained. They want you to believe it's unexplained and unidentified. It's not true. Mind control, using words to control how you think. And then, of course, my friend, who assured me that he would do an impartial study on this Atacama skeleton, who is a tenured professor at Stanford University and holds the Harris Chair, which is a $10 million endowed chair at Stanford. And I have met Tristan Harris, who is very well known in the tech world. And Tristan Harris is someone who is very much aware of this subject. And we'll get into that in a moment. Let's go through the rest of these quickly. You can just see CIA, next. CIA, next. In the interest of time, we're not going to go through all these. Department of Defense, next. And on, and on, and on. Now, what's worrisome about this? Well, I heard as soon as this information came out in December, and it started being covered globally about this case off the California coast of jets with footage of a UFO zipping along and moving in a non-aerodynamic way. I was contacted by a source who's been with the CIA for 30, 40 years. And he sent me an email, and he said to me, he said, this is the rat pack that has been running scams, I'm quoting from the email, on the public and the U.S. government for decades. But we hope their force will soon dissipate. It was very cryptic. I knew, by the way, before that film footage in December that was on the New York Times and CNN and other world media, that was coming out and that this group was facilitating that release. But behind the release isn't just the information, because the follow-on interviews that these people have done have all been about a threat. It's all within the context of a threat. Why? Because if there's a threat, it supports a military, industrial, international cabal who wants a bigger enemy than the Taliban and ISIS to fight. And that's what's coming. And this is what you have to be aware of. This has been fast-tracked now. This is on a fast track, and I have that confirmed by the highest levels of the intelligence community. So, come March 22nd, 26th, somewhere in that period, on the online version of this journal, Genome Research, is the article that submarines the Atacama humanoid. And with it, they wished my credibility. Now, what's important about this is that Genome Research magazine, it's associated with Cold Spring Harbor, which is where Watson and Crick, discovered DNA. Unfortunately, this journal, which is supposedly peer-reviewed, did not do any proper peer review of the article. And we can prove this now. What happened is that it turns out that this Genome Research is sort of a lower tier scientific journal compared to Cell or Nature or some of the others. But the authors were prestigious enough that they ran it through and published it and rushed to publish it. 5 years after Nolan had already told the media it was a deformed human. And in this article, he says, well, it's alien baby syndrome. There are 7 spontaneous all-at-once mutations that happened in utero, and that it's a deformed female fetus that was aborted at around 22 weeks. Absolutely not true. He also states that it was from 40 years ago that this skeleton had been sitting in the desert. The people who actually excavated it found it in strata of remains of an archaeological site dating from the late 1800s to about 1930. He also claims that we told him that it was thousands of years old, which no one ever did. We knew it wasn't. So there was one misrepresentation after another after another. And I knew something was very wrong when I was at one of my daughter's homes, and this had broken. We had a phone call from my wife's brother, who is an academic in Boston, and says, well, see, this thing your husband was pursuing, it's just all nonsense. It's just a deformed fetus. And I'm reading the article in the New York Times. I didn't know. I was shocked. I said, what? So somehow, this cabal that Gary's gotten connected to the Stars Academy, arrange for any bit of information that comes out will be on the front pages of the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN. Meanwhile, Unacknowledged, which is the top documentary in the world that actually exposes the truth about this issue, blacklisted and isn't covered. Very strange. This is when we had proof that the intelligence community completely owns the media. And they own them lock, stock, and barrel when it comes to anything this sensitive. And so we're on our own now, friends. It's up to us, because this monstrous cabal has absolutely seen to it that the falsehoods are going to trump the truth. Now, look at the coverage all over the world. And on my WikiLeaks page, it says this is a deformed human. I can't get it changed. We tried to change it, but WikiLeaks is mobbed up too. I mean, not WikiLeaks, Wikipedia. So what you find is that there is an orchestration of a release of information mixed with disinformation coming from what the CIA official calls the Rat Pack that's been running scams on the public for decades. It's very worrisome. And it also means that we are going to have to do this through the alternative media. All right? And that's what we have to set upon doing. Now, this is something, if you wish to read any of this, you can. Unless you have a PhD in molecular biology or genetics or an MD, I think it will be inscrutable. But let me tell you the shock of my life. It happened a few weeks ago. Not one, but multiple people contacted me from the academic world and said, that article that's in Genome Research magazine that's gotten worldwide coverage, junk science start to finish. One gentleman, who is a man who literally has a Caltech PhD in genetics, who had worked with Watson, Sanger, had done the pioneering work on X-ray crystallography of DNA, etc., contacted me urgently and said, Dr. Kreier, this is something very wrong here. And one of the first emails he says, as a non-expert, might not have noticed it, but I'm fairly sure that Nolan and colleagues planned a fake analysis from the beginning. They included lots of random mutations in their sequences by intent, by omitting a standard treatment to remove them. What is he talking about? Well, he sent me an article that had come out over 10 years ago that was about old DNA. So there's DNA you take out of your body when it's living. There's DNA that you get from a skeleton that's been laying in the desert, like the Atacama, for decades. Totally different treatment of that. Because once it's out in the environment, not in a preserved environment, not in a cryogenic lab, there is rapid oxidation and degradation of that DNA. And everyone in genetics knows this. So you have to do controls at the very beginning that are very inexpensive and very fast to find out how many of these have been oxidized and how many base pairs have switched with each other to see what the damage to the DNA is, because otherwise you're going to call that damage a mutation, which is exactly what they did deliberately. They took damage that any body in a PhD program, never mind someone at a professor level at UCSF and Stanford, would have caught. And they called it mutations of a fetus. Now, this is not my opinion. This is the opinion of these scientists. So we have 2 separate peer reviews now. And the peer review system usually works where they put the information out, but they leave their names off of it. And frankly, both of these men want to stay out of this scandal. But their pedigree is impeccable. And when I talked to the first one who contacted me, he said, Dr. Greer, you would have to have been someone who walked off the street into that lab at Stanford not to have known this. And to have done this, he says, is a academic corruption scandal like he has never seen in his career. He's an elderly man. And I said, yeah, I know that, but I'm not a geneticist. I don't have a PhD from UCSF. I have a daughter who does in genetics, neuroscience. But I am a doctor, medical doctor, and so I understand the principle of what he was explaining. And I said, well, this is a huge problem then, because we have now the worldwide media covering this Atacama skeleton, calling it a human when it isn't. Now, in and of itself, the Atacama being isn't that important. There's plenty of evidence. If you look at all the material we've collected for UFOs, extraterrestrial, then why am I even dwelling with this? Because this is a case study in how the intelligence community will try to sideline actual disclosure and have a clear field for the fake disclosure that's coming, that will be based on a false flag operation, that will be false from start to finish, will have a core of actual evidence, but surrounded by the atmospherics of a threat that's alien. We're going to get into this later. So, without going into all the details, he also explained the second person who contacted me, number 2, is a PhD geneticist who has worked in academic and government centers and then started genome sequencing companies. Now, he was right down the road from Stanford in Mountain View. This is perhaps one of the great world experts in genome sequencing. And he said he had contacted Nolan and his team to do a reference-free sequence of the entire genome of the Atacama skeleton. What does that mean? It means that without prejudice, you take the genetic material and you run the entire genome. Now this takes massive computational. We're talking about billions of base pairs in the DNA. But you do the entire mapping and you do a read that ends up with, like 90 billion reads. Very in-depth. He offered to do this for them, was turned down. When Sirius came out, said, no, we won't do it. Another geneticist contacted me and said he had offered before that to help them do a proper genetic analysis and had also been turned away. And these were people who just wanted to know the truth of what is this thing? Is it human? Is it some other primate? Is it extraterrestrial? Is it a hybrid? What the heck is it? Because no one knew what this was. And you know what? We still don't know. And that's the tragedy here. So ultimately, once this happened, and I think this is where we get into the deeper part of the intelligence community and the media cooperation and academia that we have to begin to understand and not be naive about. That what you are told in the public and what actually happens is almost never related to the truth. on any subject I've been intimate with and known the details of. None of it. So what we have to begin to understand, we're living in the Truman Show. We're sort of like going around, it's like Jim Carrey in the Truman Show, that movie. And we think we know how the world works, how the government works, how the media works, or even what science is. We don't. We've been told absolutely a myth. And it is time for us to change that once and for all. If we understand what these men are saying, and I understand that they're actually more blunt in person, where they say, this is corruption. This is scientific corruption. This was fraud at the beginning. Now, I don't know. What I'm saying is that and I have a letter in my possession here that I have just completed this week that is going to the provost of Stanford and to UCSF and to Cold Spring Harbor Genome Research. And in it's a 3-page letter that lays this out. And it is basically demanding that they return any genetic material to us, because we're not going to get more of it, that there be a retraction of this journal, that they reimburse us for, you crowdfunded tens of thousands of dollars to go over and do this study on this. The public did. And we have all been deceived. And this needs to be corrected. So this is also going to go to various federal agencies, because I have a mole inside UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, who I will not name, who is discovering that there apparently have been misuse of federal dollars in this endeavor. So this could end up being a massive scandal. So I'm asking for the academic corruption of this to be investigated, to see where the science went wrong, and to find out how the cherry picking of the DNA happened. What do I mean by that? Well, one of these gentlemen, the genome sequencing expert, just one example, this is one out of pages and pages of material these experts have sent me. We're diploid, right? We have 2 sets of chromosomes, our alleles are diploid. Well, there are ones that are triploid. They have 3. The Atacama, it turns out, had 360,000 triploid reads. They were all thrown out and dismissed as not important. Now this is in the data if you drill down into the attachments to this paper. Now normally if you were to take a read and you had 90 billion reads on a fresh human DNA sample, there might be 200 that just happen due to programming error or something. Yeah, out of 90 billion, you're going to have that. This is 360,000 triploid on only a small amount of DNA they studied. The other thing they did was to extrapolate on a very small amount of the DNA sequence the entire genome of this creature instead of running the entire genome. So instead of a 90 billion read through, there were 509 million. So that's a fraction, like 0.2%. And then there's this mystery. When the first initial run was done, I was contacted by Nolan, and he said, this is only matching 89 to 91% with humans, and maybe less than that by the time we do deeper reads. The head of this genome sequencing company, about the time the film series came out, when he called Nolan at Stanford, was told it was down to 70 to 80%. Now it's believed it may be a fraction of 1% matching. It is not at all what we've been told. Now, I'm not going to drill down in a public setting with all the esoteric genetic sequencing technology, but one thing that has been said by all the scientists who've looked at this is that deliberate cherry picking of the data was done, antiquated techniques and technology was used, even though state-of-the-art was offered. And then you have Nolan hooking up with this group filled with CIA and Department of Defense people, publishes this in a little-known journal that gets worldwide media coverage on something this obscure. Why? because as the father of the disclosure movement globally, they need to neutralize me. And if they won't do it through an assassin, they'll do it this way. So that's what this is actually about. To that end, we won't go there too far, but we have to understand there's nothing new under the sun with this. And I just want to show you the kind of coverage that happened from this counterintelligence master at the Pentagon, Elizondo. Now, some of you may have seen this on CNN.
Purpose of the program, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, was really designed to do just that. From a national security perspective, identify those things that we see, whether we see them electro-optically, we see them with radar, we see them as eyewitness reports, through a myriad of different ways and avenues that we receive the information, and try to ascertain and determine if that information is a potential threat to national security, in a nutshell.
So what did you find?
Well, we found a lot. I think it's probably been a little bit mischaracterized in some of the social media you see and what people put out, because a lot of times when we don't have a lot of information, we tend to fill in those gaps with what we think is logical. And there's still, by the way, a lot we really don't know. I think what's important is that we have identified some very, very interesting anomalous type of aircraft. Let's call them aircraft. Things that don't have any obvious flight surfaces, any obvious forms of propulsion, and maneuvering in ways that include extreme maneuverability beyond, I would submit, the healthy G-forces of a human or anything biological, hypersonic velocities, low observability, positive lift, again, seemingly in defying the laws of aerodynamics. I will tell you unequivocally that through the observation, scientific methodologies that were applied to look at this phenomena, that these aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the U.S. inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of.
So I know you're being clear, but I mean, the answer is yes.
I can't speak on behalf of the government. Obviously, I'm not in the U.S. government anymore. My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
Basically, in this interview, he's talking about this case. But there's also this implied, well, we don't really know what these are, but it's a UFO, it was a craft. And now this is someone who has worked in compartment operations dealing directly with extraterrestrial information. And yet he will say partial truths to the public. The key here is you don't lie about everything, you just lie about the most important things. Because if you can coat the poison pill with enough truth, people will swallow the rest of the message, which is there's a threat from outer space. And that is what is happening. Next. So along comes this movie, came out a year ago. Many of you have seen it, most of you. It went viral, thanks to you. Because of that, you had this billionaire in Las Vegas, Robert Bigelow, put on 60 Minutes within weeks. He was the one who had received $22 million from this secret office in the Pentagon, headed up by Elizondo, to look into UFOs. And there's a lot of very questionable activity there. Then you find the formation of the TTSA, To the Stars Academy, with Tom DeLonge and the Rat Pack, as it has been called. Then you have what happens in December, worldwide release, it puts them on the radar, and then in March, the submarining of the original disclosure effort with the Atacama cover-up. That's the time sequence. This is something of historical note to those of you who study this issue, and it's from the 50s, and it's the Robertson panel, and some of you may have heard of this. And like the Condon Committee in the 60s that ended Project Blue Book, this was a committee put together of alleged scientists who actually were tasked by the CIA to debunk the issue and also to enlist astronomers to throw pipe hands in the sky and take photographs of them that would look like pictures of actual UFOs, so that they could say, see, that's all that was, someone just threw a pipe hand in the sky. That is literally stated in this document. I have the entire, whatever it is, 30 pages of the Robertson panel CIA report. The cover-up that has been done in the scientific community in collusion with the intelligence community is stunning and breathtaking. And it goes back more than 60 years, since before I was born. So this is not a new phenomenon. Unfortunately, it is the oldest trick in the book. And you take people who have significant scientific credentials, you then put them on your payroll or give them other inducements. I don't know what happened at Stanford and UCSF exactly. That's why we need an investigation. We do know there was a $3.2 million Department of Defense award within a month of us handing the DNA off, which is highly suspicious. But this has happened before. Now we can look at this next slide. If you read the Disclosure Project material, Dr. Robert Woods was a McDonnell Douglas aerospace engineer, PhD, and knew Mr. McDonnell, the chairman, personally. He had been asked to be on the Condon Committee, which in 1969 had been put together by the Air Force to study UFOs, and became a foil or a front to shut down the public relations office on UFOs in the Air Force, which is all Project Blue Book was primarily, at least the part the public knew about. And Dr. Woods was actually bringing hard evidence, like we have brought forward, that the UFOs are real, some are interplanetary, here's the evidence, here are the radar tracings, here are the landings, here's all this evidence. So Professor Condon at the University of Colorado arranged to have him fired from McDonnell Douglas. He personally went to the chairman of McDonnell Douglas Aerospace and said, I want this man fired, and tried to terminate his career for bringing the truth to this alleged scientific study at the University of Colorado. This is a fact. I have a CIA document that states that Dr. Condon was on the payroll of the CIA and that this could not be known by the public. All the while, the media, the academic community, the ivory tower people are going, see, this committee of esteemed astrophysicists and astronomers and scientists have studied this, there's nothing to it. So they shut down Project Blue Book. And the cover for them doing so was the Condon Committee. And Dr. Woods is on tape, and we have this in our book, in Unacknowledged, the book, and in the movie, attempting to be fired by Professor Condon, who went over his head directly to the chairman of McDonnell Douglas, which has now became part of Boeing. Luckily, Mr. McDonald liked Dr. Woods, did not fire him, and kept him on, but he was thrown, Dr. Woods was thrown off the Condon Committee.
And so I became friendly with several of them, Roy Craig and a couple of the others, and I concluded that this was not an objective study. So I wrote a letter to Condon suggesting that it might be helpful if he would establish his group in two parts and have one of believers and one of disbelievers and let both of them go to work with their angles. And said, I'm taking the liberty of sending a copy of this letter to every member of your group whose addresses I had received from them privately. And he was so furious at that he called up James S. McDonald, who was at that time the chairman of the newly merged Douglas and McDonnell aircraft companies, and tried to get me fired. Really. I found this out 3 years later from my boss, who apparently, number one, reported that McDonnell said, I don't like other people meddling in my business. So that was nice to hear from the CEO. And he asked the usual question, well, what did he do? And the answer is he wrote a letter And he wrote a letter that had been approved through my management, because that's what I did.
So there too, anyone who didn't stay with the party line of what the intelligence community wanted them to say, who were academicians, scientists, were thrown off the committee. Well, that's not an impartial committee. That's a dog and pony show, worthy of the show trials of the Soviet Union in their lowest nadir. But we do the same thing. And now it's been done to us. That's why this case is important. We are watching the Robertson Committee, the Condon Committee, being played out in real time within the last 2 months from Stanford, UCSF, Genome Research Magazine, the Rat Pack, the intelligence community, submarining what could be one of the most important cases of physical proof of a non-human, humanoid-like, human-like being. This should concern everyone. So that's what has happened. Now, you know, people say, well, how can they pull this off? I mean, is it really possible? This is more from these reports. And these are all in my collection. I have thousands of pages of this. You know, after I briefed the CI director, I did a request, not through normal FOIA, and got a box this big, thousands of pages of documents. Need an intern to sort them through and scan them. But if you scan them, you can't read them because they're such bad quality. Anyway, they have to be transcribed. So, but we have a huge catch of it. And these are official documents. These are not, the provenance isn't, and this is, you know, from the CIA. And we have two more interesting clips. And this man, who is himself a counterintelligence agent, many people don't like that we used his testimony in the unacknowledged film, but he is trying to come clean on a lot of things. And in it, he talks about, in this particular segment, the Air Force and Office of Special Investigations out of Kirkland Air Force Base over here in New Mexico, that they would, you know, bring cash to pay off national and local news editors, particularly ones dealing with national security, to get the story they wanted from the media. He did this personally. Bags of cash, satchels of cash. And he stopped short of saying how much, but he said large sums, very large sums.
So every news agency, every television, radio station in the Albuquerque, Santa Fe area had our snitches in there. So we knew, and we paid them. We paid them good money. One of the reasons you get the people is you pay them. And that was controversial. That was somewhat controversial.
Do you know of national media that have had
some? Yes, yeah. I'm not going to name them. Yeah, the high-level producers and directors, yeah.
And how were they paid? So that
cash. Yeah, you pay. What you do is you make them sign a form and you tell them, you got to report this to IRS. But whether they do it or not, you're not going to give your form to IRS. I paid. I better not say. Some of them are large.
So the media has people within it who are really on the payroll of the intelligence community, who are posing to be impartial journalists, and they are not. And in this next slide, you'll see that in Unacknowledged, we have a gentleman who is a constitutional attorney, Daniel Sheehan, who says when back in many years ago, he was involved in the Pentagon Papers and represented the New York Times in the civil case with that. And he states point blank that he saw a document with 42 people on the payroll of the CIA who were senior editors in national security, writers and editors for the major media around the world on the payroll of the CIA.
There's a finding that the Pike Committee made that they had verified 42 full-time Central Intelligence Agency paid employees that were inserted inside the major national news media centers. And most of them ended up being the so-called national security reporters. I know reporters for Time magazine who've told me specifically that they've provided the stories and their editors have spiked them.
So how hard is it for them to pull a stunt like this? Induce or threaten someone, and they kind of have big sticks and big carrots to say whatever they want them to say, and then hit a button and it's global news on CNN, New York Times. That's what's happened. And I think anyone, American, British, because this is a worldwide story happening, should be deeply concerned at this level of corruption in academia, in the media, and in government. Because it means that we do not have a chance until we call them out on this. And this is what we need help. I'm calling for investigators and people who are top legal litigators, lawyers, to join with me in taking this issue on, because this has the opportunity of exposing the modus operandi, the means of corruption that has been going on for 60 or 70 years by these folks. And it's time that we get to the bottom of it. So here we have this little Atacama person, and I think that I want to go through what I think really we have lost as a civilization. This, what I did in the last hour, is just give you the big picture. Now I want to drill down. What if this is some other type of being, not human or extraterrestrial? Maybe it's one of the wee people they talk about in Ireland. Who knows? I mean, I'm only half joking, because in the interest of science, if you're going to be a scientist, you're supposed to pursue the truth. You don't say what something is before you've begun your investigation, which is what happened here. So I wanted us to take a step back and realize how profound the damage to science and also to the media and to our freedoms of this sort of thing happening. Because when you have geneticists of the caliber who have come forward saying this had to be faked from the beginning, this is academic corruption, this is the worst junk science they've ever seen. By the way, there are 10 other PhD molecular biologists and geneticists who have looked at this research who said it's just complete, they didn't want to waste the time on it. It was so obviously false. They didn't want to waste their time, because it takes days and days and days to drill down on the data and on all these files. Now, who's paying any attention? The writers at the New York Times? No. They're told, go cover this story. They cover it. They don't know. They're just sort of cogs in the machine. Well, you know, there used to be a band called Rage Against the Machine. We need to kind of stand up to this machine and push back now, because the machine is about to roll over the entire planet in a way that you can't believe. And the thing that I'm most concerned about right now is that there are no checks and balances except the Disclosure Project, which I founded back in the 1990s. But the National Press Club was 17 years ago this month, on May 9th. And what I have found is it's been hijacked by a number of elements in the intelligence community and people who are just, frankly, posers and clowns. The problem with that is that because we know that we have proven in the last 12 months that a film like Unacknowledged, which is very hard-hitting, evidence-driven, military witness testimony, photographs, documents, it's all going to be blacklisted by the mainstream media, right? But it doesn't mean we can't succeed, because thank God there's the alternative media, and there's you and me, and we can do it and just bypass CNN and bypass the New York Times. But it means that we're going to have to do some strategizing to do that well and to do it effectively. Because we need at least 1% of the global population to begin to awaken to this. 1%, 75 million people. And why is that? Because they have found that in scientific quantum physics phase transition studies, you need about 1% of a substrate. The best I like is the superfluidity in helium, where at a certain, getting down to near absolute zero, you have this effect where you have coherence of molecules that line up in a container of helium. And when about 1% is reached, the entire, now, just before this, it becomes very violent, very unstable, very chaotic, and then bang, at that 1% point, there is coherence. Massive field coherence. We need that 1% coherence. 75 million people globally. In this country, it would be, 1% of 330 million. That's 3.3 million. So the only way we're going to get there is to get the truth to that number of people and get them moving in the same direction coherently. Does this make sense to you? Because we are sort of a macrocosm of the quantum state, each of us, as we collectively act, speak, think, meditate, whatever we do. And that's really how we can make a big transition on this planet to a new civilization. Otherwise, we're slated for an extinction level event. And I think that this I'll get into in a moment. It has already been approved, this event. I've just gotten a briefing on it in the last month. But we have little time. Or very little. I think that we, the people of the planet, are going to have to take control of this from the fascists. I was sharing in the green room before I started with some friends that there's a man who I've been working with for a year and a half or so, who's a son of a member of this committee, this magic majority intelligence committee. And his family included, he's the grandson of Paul Mellon. And at the end of World War II, Paul Mellon, along with General Patton, went over to Germany and got the secret weapon that they were working on, which was there was the Nazi bell, you've heard of, there was also a disc. They were not fully operational, but they were making progress. But we got the atomic bomb first. Point, set, match, war ends. But does it? Did it? It did not. What this gentleman has told me is that his entire family are fascists. They supported Adolf Hitler up to the day we declared war, and then they got back the fascists and put them into our system in the United States. And so it has come to pass. If you think otherwise, you are deluded. Here is the fact of that. George Patton himself wanted that technology disclosed to the public because he saw the benefits it would bring to humanity. Because of that, this group had him assassinated. George Patton was assassinated. It also means that the foundations of much of what we call the CIA, they do the conventional work. Most of the men and women in the Pentagon and CIA are fine people. But there is a rotten core that needs to be checked, and checked quickly, or we are all in very big trouble. Major trouble. In October, I got an urgent call from these folks that at a meeting with the director of the CIA, Pompeo, and with two people known to us at the meeting, this issue of disclosure and unacknowledged came up. And there was a woman at the meeting who was not named to me. I'm concerned it's the person who is going through hearings right now to be the director of the CIA, who stopped the conversation and said, "Oh yes, the American people like to have things to complain about. Pretty soon, we're going to really give them something to whine about." Ominously, very ominously. Now, this was in October that I learned of this, and this is May. In the intervening period, the December New York Times, CNN, Rat Pack story the submarining of Sirius and of the Disclosure Project globally. And I have found that there are two factions within the intelligence community who have green-lighted disclosure. And what I'm going to share with you about that is something that I'm not sure you're going to want to hear, but I think you need to know. Do you want to know? I don't know. I mean, often what I find with people, they say they want to hear the truth. And I said, I feel like that movie, A Few Good Men with Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth. You know, he gets all excited. I think we have to handle the truth. I think it's time for us to go into the detail of exactly what is happening in the intelligence community that is outside the control of the president and of many of the senior officers. These are operations that are not, they are unacknowledged, and they are not under legal supervision and control. And they are a government, as Senator Inouye said, of their own making. They have their own Air Force, they have their own Space Force, they have their own Navy, they have their own funding mechanism. I'm paraphrasing from Senator Inouye, talking about this deep, covert program. How are we going to address this? I think we have to address it by bringing out as much information as we can and being sure that the public is aware of what the truth is about the fact that we're not alone in the universe, but also what is the fakery and what is being done to manipulate it. Now, because I've done two things to beta test my theory about the national security state and the media. One was the 2001 National Press Club event. Not all of you know this story. That was done as, sorry about that, that was done as a launch of something we had started in 1993 when I was asked to brief President Clinton, CIA director, by some folks. And contrary to what sort of the buffoonery in the UFO subculture, the so-called Rockefeller Initiative had nothing to do with Rockefeller. It was called Project Starlight, which I founded with some people to end the secrecy, which Lawrence Rockefeller, the philosopher of the family, wanted to see happen, but David Rockefeller did not. Chase Manhattan Bank and the J.P. Morgan Chase. I have shared very little of the inner workings of what happened and all the betrayals that happened to Lawrence and to me during that period. But let's just say that the letter that was sent to me inviting me to brief the CIA director, where it said the most powerful people in the world will have a compelling interest to do everything to intercept this effort, was very prescient and very accurate. And that is what happened. In 1999, before we did the 2001 National Press Club, I wrote a paper called When Disclosure Serves Secrecy. It's on our website, seriousdisclosure.com. Read it and memorize it. Because I wrote it because I knew it was happening already. It wasn't a theoretical discussion. That the effort at disclosure would be hijacked by elements who would then spin it in the direction of a threat or an eschatological crisis, an end of the world sort of thing, apocalyptic, which is what we'll talk about after the break. And that's what has been green-lighted and approved as of about 30 days ago. So, true. Now, when we did the 2001 press conference, it was covered globally, briefly. And then all the media in the world were ordered to take it down. The grandson of James Jesus Angleton III, the man whose signature is on the document about Marilyn Monroe just before she died, that's in the book, Unacknowledged, called me up and said, you know, you've moved up our timeline 12 years of what we were planning to do. This was 17 years ago. And I said, yes, I'm aware of that. We're disrupting some very big plans. that were hatched in the 40s and 50s. And if we don't direct the outcome, it will be an extinction level situation for humanity. So this is a very serious discussion now. Now, everything I'm going to share with you I've known since 1993, 94. It's hard. You have to understand the forces that are insane. And I've had people, I'm an emergency doctor, and I have people say, how could these people want to do these things? Why would they keep it secret? Don't they know the Earth needs these technologies? I go, sure. But this is like asking Eichmann and Adolf Hitler, why did they shove 6 million Jews and all the gay people in the ovens? This is not a rational thing. This is not something you can relate to out of your living room or looking at late night TV and then kind of relate to the psychology of sociopaths and psychopaths. It's just not there. Now, I've dealt with psychopaths and sociopaths as a trauma guy. I'm on the front lines of emergency. And I have dealt with ones who are in the intelligence community and in the military. Unfortunately, the ruthless sociopaths and psychopaths have taken over the operational control of these unacknowledged special access projects that this movie, Unacknowledged, was based on. And there are many good men who've been in those projects. They have no idea what the agenda of those above their pay grade might be. I had one such man contact me a couple months ago when I was recovering from this shoulder surgery. I fell mountain climbing and have 5 big 1-inch screws in my shoulder, so I'm a little uncomfortable. But I never stop. My wife says, you're a machine. Anyway, but jock injury number 60 I've had. But the point is, this guy sends an email in and we contact him and he says, oh yeah, you're quite right about what happened to Bill Colby back in mid-90s when he was going to get one of these zero-point technologies to us and some seed money, about $50 million, to get it out to the public. But what you don't realize is that I know the man who authorized that assassination. And of course, he told me, and it's somebody, a name you would all know. I'm not going to mention it here. But I said, yes, I know that those are folks who did not want one of their own at that level defecting. And so they were taken out, which is why I do things in this sort of strange and mysterious way I do them now. It was not wisely set up, and it was set up against my best advice to this CIA director, Colby. He wanted to do it clandestinely, like a spy would. I said, no. You do it in front of the entire world, the whole world watching in real time. He wouldn't do it. I have a former president that I'm hoping to get a admission about all this from fairly soon. There's a lot happening, but what I'm afraid of is that the more we step forward, the more this group is going to try to accelerate the false flag. And I think it's time for you guys to understand, leave the buffoonery of ufology behind you. Almost everything you know and have studied has been pre-positioned weapon of mass disinformation destruction of your consciousness. There is a need to do a very deep drill down on what is the agenda that's actually operating at this point, right now. Because the factions that want to do a quasi or official disclosure are competing with each other and racing to do it. One involves elements in the public with the Rat Pack, to the Stars Academy. The other you wouldn't know about. One is a National Security Agency official, and the other is CIA. And it involves some extraordinary technology. And I'm going to go through this in the second half of this workshop, because you need to understand what our human capabilities are. And it might explain, this is why these are my closing remarks, it doesn't seem related to the Atacama, perhaps what this Atacama being is. You've all been taught that matter and energy is primary. In reality, the field of consciousness and thought and these other dimensions are primary and manifest this dimension. Does this make sense to people? You have to turn everything around that you've been taught, completely invert it. And in order to understand that your physical body even is actually supported by what the mystics used to call the astral body and the body of light and the conscious field and all of this. But so is this podium, and so is this planet, and so is space and time. Now, this is beautiful knowledge, and it's ancient knowledge. The Vedas knew it, the Native Americans knew it. Every ancient tradition knows this. And at the core of almost every spiritual tradition, there's some of this information that's, it may be a residual amount, but it's there. Now, the science behind this has developed rapidly over the last 60 years. And it can be used like any technology for good, but it can also be used as a weapon. And the weaponization, for example, of interdimensional portals is not theoretical. It has already happened. And this is a serious problem. So we're now looking at something like this Atacama humanoid, which, again, no idea what it is. It would point certainly to not being human. But could it be something, a civilization that came here 100,000 years ago and has been coming to and fro for a long time and has been on this planet for quite some time, or even before Homo sapiens? Yes, could be. Could be that. Could it be that it's emerging from another dimension into this dimension, traversing the vastness of space and time, and then manifests the body you saw out of elements of the earth using a template in the resonant field of consciousness, thought, so-called astral field, into this dimension? Yes, because we can do that in laboratories at the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works and have done so. Could it be a previously unknown type of species, native to the Earth, but that had evolved ahead of us and gone interstellar and still has a home here? It could be. We don't know. It's okay to say we don't know. It's not okay to defraud the public, fake the data, get the world media behind it, and submarine the truth, the scientific truth. That is not okay. And that's what we need your help, because the reason this whole Atacama scandal, and the reason it's also very radioactive, the scientists who've looked into it, is that if they have done what I've been told by these senior scientists they've done, this would rise to one of the biggest cases of academic and intelligence community and media collusion and fraud in U.S. history, period. Which, as I mentioned at the beginning, in and of itself, the Atacama being is not that important. There's so much other evidence. But as a case study that we could then use to peel back how these guys are operating, it could be dispositive. It could be proof. And that's why I'm making a call now, today, at 3:30 Pacific time, through this webinar, for an investigative team and a team of scientists and also attorneys to come forward to pursue this aggressively and very quickly. Now, the letter that I have that will be going to Stanford and UCSF and Cold Spring Harbor and Genome Research, it will go out next week. It will then be on our website along with the attachments, which are the full comments from these peer-reviewed scientists. You're welcome to read them. If you're how many people are MDs or PhDs here? I'm just curious. So there are a few of you. But it is very jargon-laden and esoteric. But, you know, if you can get through it or know someone who can get through it with you, I recommend it. I am not going to take the time, as I said at the beginning, to do that, because I'm trying to give you more knowledge and information about what actually happened and what the big picture is. And the big picture is that in 2001, Disclosure Project was launched with 10 times, 100 times, the evidence and material of what was on CNN in December from this group that wants to position everything as a threat, the To the Stars Academy group, and had all this information in it. It rose into the media and was immediately shut down. I don't know if you are aware that the first hour of the transmission out of the National Press Club in Washington was electronically jammed so that no signals could leave that facility. The night before, I had security people who saw special operations people on the roof of that building and doing some things. So we anticipated that would happen, but it eventually did go online, but it became so out of control that the contractor for the National Press Club that hosted it for the internet said it was the most watched event in the history of the internet at that time, and it actually got the attention of Bill Gates and Larry Ellison, all kinds of people, because the bandwidth, they had to use up every, back then, old-fashioned T1 line they could access because there was too many people wanting to see it. That's when we knew, and that's when everything got jammed and shut down. Same thing with Unacknowledged. Netflix has featured it as one of the top picks of the year. 120 million subscribers. iTunes has featured it. The Orchard, thank you, is a division of Sony, and they have done a great job getting it out. But we did this without a Hollywood advertising budget. And it was crowdfunded by all of you. Thank you. The next thing we do has to be 10 times bigger and faster. And that's what we're making a second call for production teams and personnel to create 2 feature films in the next 12 months. One on the real story behind disclosure and beyond, what I'm calling beyond the alien mask. There's the mask of what you think is alien. Take the mask off. There's the frickin' Wizard of Oz pulling the levers, fooling everybody. We got to do that. It will be highly controversial. And as much as I'm hated in the UFO circles, I'll be 10 times hated more. I don't care. I'm not running for mayor of Crazy Town. I'm only interested in the truth, thank you. But really, honestly. But at the same time, we have to do Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Why? Because if 1% of the world population sees that movie, like they have Unacknowledged, tens of millions of people, and begin to become coherent in the field of consciousness, we can shift the entire trajectory of this civilization onto a path of enlightenment, onto the path of sustainability, onto the path of world peace and universal peace. That's our destiny. That's where humanity should be already. Should have been there 50 to 100 years ago if Nikola Tesla had his way, right? And here we are in 2018, 100 years after World War I ended, almost 75 years after World War II ended, and we still have the warmongers and the sociopaths and the crazies running amok in the planet. So we the people have to stand up and do this. Will the president help us? I don't know. I provided an extensive brief that was handed to him, put in his hands when he was nominated, like I have for every president. Will Vladimir Putin step up to the plate? I have people in the Kremlin who are very close to him who are asking me for information. We're providing it. Will the Chinese president? Will Theresa May in England? I don't know. We can hope, we can pray, but we can't wait. We, the people, have to do this. We, the people, have to do disclosure, create interplanetary contact, and create a mass movement that shifts the entire global trajectory onto the right path. I know we can do that because it doesn't take that many people to affect massive change in seen and unseen ways. We just have to organize ourselves to do it. And that's why I left my medical career, to do it. No one is going to do it for you. You're going to do it for yourselves and your children and your grandchildren. And I hope for the 20,000s or so generations yet unborn, because the era that we have entered into is an era that is about a 500,000 year big cycle of development in human evolution. And there's an old cycle, about 500,000 years, 450,000 years, that's closing. So this cycle we're in the throes of that transition between an old cycle and a new. And some people say, well, it's the end of the world. I say it's the end of the world as we know it. Not the end of the world literally. People have misinterpreted all the scriptures. And it's the beginning of a new civilization. And that's where we are. But people who have interests in the old order, whether it be petroleum, war, controlling the masses, certain belief systems in religious orders, they don't want to see this change. And there are many people who have much to lose with a change this large. You know, some years ago when I was dealing with Neil Armstrong, a good friend of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, about what happened when we landed on the moon. We weren't alone when we landed, as you know. But along came this guy, and I was looking into, with Mark Carlotta at Goddard Space Flight Center, these strange structures on Mars, and also Buzz Aldrin pointed out on the moon, Phobos. And this man came up to me and identified himself as a senior scientist at Jet Propulsion Labs. And he said, you know, we can't let that information out. And I said, what do you mean? Why not? It's old. These are old structures. There's some operational facilities underneath the surface of Mars, I was told by the head of Army Intelligence, but these old structures would just show evidence of civilizations that may be millions or tens of millions of years ago, or longer. He says, no, you don't understand. If those were confirmed as real, it would collapse the orthodox and fundamentalist belief systems of every underlined, writ large, religion on Earth. And I said, well, so? I said, science and religion can agree, it just can't agree with superstitious claptrap. And he said, no, you don't understand the power of those groups. I thought the man had lost his mind, but I have since found out that that is a very significant part of the secrecy here. And one of the people who's recently contacted me is part of that cell that are eschatologists, which is the study of how the world will end. And as Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein told me in a private meeting in July of 1994 at the Four Seasons in New York City, he said, you know, the reason I'm funding all the abduction groups in the United States is that we really want people to hate the aliens so that they will support an interplanetary war that would lead to Armageddon so that Jesus Christ will return. I said, excuse me? This is the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, the banking family that funded Adolf Hitler, blah, blah, blah. I go, excuse me? What are you talking about? And he began to explain to me how that was essential, that there be enough people willing to sacrifice blood and treasure and in their belief to engage in an interplanetary conflict so that the Messiah would return for the Jews, Christ would return for the Christians, the 12th Imam would return to the Muslims, the Maitra Buddha would return to the Buddhists, etc., and so on. I said, well, this is the craziest damn thing I've ever heard. But they want to set that up, and that's what they're doing. Now, if I had heard this from someone who was low on their lithium level or Haldol in the ER, but this is a man of immense power and wealth, hobnobbing with the elite of the world and who is on this committee. That was in 1994. Okay, this is 24 years on. What I'm trying to explain to you is that this is a huge story, much bigger than what we can portray in Unacknowledged or have. That's with training wheels on. The next movie, let's take the training wheels off. Okay, you want to? Who wants to do it? Let's do it. It's going to go from ET 101 and 102 and maybe 201, since we're at a university, to the postdoc level, because we don't have time to sort of go through all the iterations. Now, what it also means is that because I have proven through very well organized strategies from the mid-90s to now that the mainstream media is going to block what we're doing. They are only going to feature people and messages that comport with what the intelligence community wants. That I have proven that over and over again, and if nothing proves it, is the success of Unacknowledged and it being blacklisted from, you wouldn't believe the things that have happened for it to be taken down out of media reports and out of algorithms on Google search and everything, and it's still the #1 in the world for the last year. Why? Because people are ready for the damn truth, and we got to give it to them. So that's what we are going to do, but I need your help. In addition to this, and this gets into the bizarre. Now, my life, if you spent 2 weeks at my house in any 2-week segment, you'd be hurling yourself off of the highest, have worse injury than this. But I have been asked in the last couple of months by a person with very close ties to the Kremlin, and someone with very close ties to the national security system and the president, to write an announcement speech for them. I will read it to you today. It's a draft. I did it at 5 a.m. this morning. ER docs just push through, just go, 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 go. It's like military ops, go, 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 go. But it's interesting because I was asked to do it. These people don't know each other, and they both separately have come forward. I'm going, why are you asking about this now? They said because they understand that this has been authorized. And there's going to be the disclosure that could be a horrific event for the planet, or there could be a disclosure that would bring in a new enlightened era for the planet. This is the biggest choice that not just our lifetimes, but it's a millennial event. And we have to get it right. We have to get it right. So tonight at about an hour and a half, I will share with you this draft. And all of you will pretend you are a head of state from different countries. So we have Theresa May. Do we have anyone from China? So we have the president of China. We have someone from Africa. We have somebody from, Russia. Lyra is here. She's originally Russian. She'll be Vladimir Putin. I don't know who of you want to be Trump. I don't know. I need the whole orange thing going. But I'm just kidding. Inappropriate. You can see why I'd be the worst politician on earth. Anyway, so, but that's what I want all of you to visualize. What would you do if you were asked to make this announcement? And how would you couch it? How do you frame it? And what do you do to get ahead of what's being planned by those who would see us sink into the worst catastrophe in recorded human history? So that's our choice. It's the choice we have to make. Now, don't get me wrong. You know, I remember when Tom Bearden said this to me, the fools may blow it yet. He's from Louisiana. It doesn't matter, because then there's plan B, the Phoenix. We're in Phoenix. And the Phoenix plan is that they still blow the system, but there's a critical mass of people to carry us forward afterwards with the correct consciousness, knowledge, and frankly, technologies to do so. The outcome will be wonderful either way in the long run. In the short run, I'm an emergency doctor. It's all about ameliorating suffering and saving lives. There are a lot of lives at stake here. There's about 5 billion of the 7.5 billion lives hanging in the balance. So, someone, they were going, and that's true. That's an accurate number. So what we have to do is figure out, do we want to divert and, pull our civilization to something that really will be amazing? Because imagine this. We overcome this kind of nonsense and we end up with a civilization that has free energy, no surface roads, electromagnetic gravitic devices used peacefully, not for missile delivery systems. We have the ability to go to the stars and back in peace. There is no poverty on the planet and no injustice within one generation. All people have their birthright of living in dignity and abundance. That technology exists today. How do we get it applied and how do we get it in place without it being weaponized and without it creating something worse than what we have already? This is why the crisis is in consciousness, is a deep spiritual crisis, and by the way, that is going to be the solution. But it's going to have the practical means to do it. So we need wise people on the planet to join in this effort. And that's all of you in this room and all of you listening. And when this goes on the internet, all of you around the world. Because there's simply no way one person's going to do this. Or one president. And in fact, I will tell you how many times I have had meetings with senators, heads of states, heads of royal families who go, this is too big of an issue for me to deal with. I don't want to deal with it. You deal with it. And kick the can down the road. That's what's been going on for 70 years. We cannot do that any longer. And I mentioned that when I first started this project, I was a young doctor and, I had 4 little kids, the ages of my grandkids now. So I have seen a generation of this go on, and I've learned a lot, and I've made mistakes, but we gotta get it right this time. We have to, because at this point in history, there is no way we can pass this on to our grandchildren. We don't have until 2050 or 2100 to fix the big biosphere problems and geopolitical problems and proliferation of weapons and conflict. All of that has to come to a head. And we have to find a good outcome for this. Now, we can do it. I have full faith that people working in concert, in coherence, from the heart and the mind and with a great purpose can achieve great things. Let us not forget, we're in the United States, but people are listening from around the world. The ragtag people who were called revolutionaries in 1776 were unfunded, had very little weapons, didn't even have uniforms, and were going up against the mightiest superpower in the world at the time, the British Empire and that Navy. And they prevailed with the help from France and some other people. We have to realize that this is a similar situation, except it doesn't have to be a violent revolution. It has to be a revolution in thought, action, disclosure, organization, and putting forward the best of humanity to not only each other, but to these extraterrestrial civilizations. That's what they're waiting for. In the next 2 hours after our break, that's what we're going to focus on. is what can we do, you and me, all of us together, to make contact with these civilizations as ambassadors to them, and to create a liaison between human civilization and these other civilizations, not waiting for the UN or the president to do it. Now, we hope they do. And you know, heck, a broken watch is correct twice a day. Might happen. But I wouldn't bet the future of humanity on it. I would bet the future of humanity on those of you in this room and those listening. Because most of the people of Earth are good people. Most of the people on Earth want a good future if they have the tools, the knowledge, the information, and the tools to do it. And that's what we have to give them. So that's what we will cover in the next segment. Thank you very much. We'll take about a 15-minute break.